Hi, intuitive Scorpio. There is something about you that people often sense before they fully understand it. You can notice when the atmosphere has changed, when someone's words don't quite match what they're feeling, or when a silence carries more weight than the conversation itself. People may call that a gift, an instinct, even a kind of emotional intelligence. But there is another question beneath all of that. What did you have to learn about the world in order to become so good at reading what lies underneath it? There is a version of your story that many people recognize immediately. It is the Scorpio who sees through appearances, who notices what others overlook, who can sit quietly while everyone else is speaking and somehow understand what is really happening beneath the surface. That part of you is real, but it may only be the visible layer. There is another story underneath it, one that asks whether your ability to see so deeply was also shaped by moments when you learned that trust had to be earned carefully, that vulnerability could carry a cost, or that staying alert felt safer than being caught unaware. For you, this depth can sometimes feel less like a choice and more like having a room inside your mind where the lights never completely go out. You notice the hesitation, the shift in someone's tone, the distance that appears between two people, the sentence that stops just before the truth comes out. From the outside, that awareness can look powerful, even mysterious, but living with it can be tiring when your mind begins searching for explanations before your heart has even had time to say what it feels. You may not simply experience a moment. You may immediately begin asking what is underneath it, what caused it, what might happen next, and whether you should protect yourself before you have any reason to. Over time, that instinct can become something more complicated than intuition. It can turn into a quiet system of emotional protection, especially when uncertainty has once felt dangerous, or when trust has not always felt simple. A change in someone's behavior, an unanswered question, a sudden distance, or a feeling you cannot yet explain may awaken an older reflex inside you. Observe first, reveal later, understand everything you can before allowing yourself to relax. And because this process can happen so quickly, you may sometimes mistake constant vigilance for wisdom, when part of you is simply trying to make sure you will never be surprised in the same vulnerable place again. That is where the gift begins to carry a hidden weight. You may become so skilled at noticing what other people leave unsaid that you forget to ask what you've been leaving unsaid to yourself. You can understand another person's hesitation, recognize their fear, sense when their words are covering something deeper, and still struggle to sit quietly with your own uncertainty without immediately trying to solve it. The strange part is that nobody may even realize how much energy this takes, because from the outside you can appear composed, private, strong, and completely in control. But what if the real question is not whether your instincts are accurate? What if the deeper question is what happens inside you after you notice something you cannot control? Around this August 13, 2026 chapter, the more meaningful reflection for Scorpio is not about predicting what someone else may reveal or what hidden truth might suddenly appear. It is about recognizing the difference between discernment and defense, between knowing when something deserves your attention and feeling as though you must remain guarded against everything you cannot immediately understand. There is a pattern that can quietly form when protection becomes part of your identity. You begin to believe that if you can understand the situation deeply enough, anticipate every possibility, and keep enough of yourself behind the door, then nothing will have the power to hurt you unexpectedly. The more uncertain something feels, the more you may want information control, distance, or time to process it alone, and the more you rely on those defenses. The harder it can become to discover what genuine safety feels like when it is not something you have created entirely by yourself. This does not mean that every Scorpio carries an old wound or that every guarded instinct comes from a painful childhood. For some people, however, this pattern may have begun when trust became something they learned to approach carefully, perhaps through experiences that taught them to read the room before revealing too much of themselves. At some point, being private may have felt wiser than being exposed. Keeping your feelings contained may have felt safer than explaining them. And knowing how to stand on your own may have become easier than discovering whether someone else could truly hold space for you. That old strategy can remain long after the circumstances that shaped it have changed. It becomes so familiar that you may stop recognizing it as protection and start calling it simply who I am. You may tell yourself that you are just selective, independent, observant, or difficult to fool, and perhaps all of those things contain some truth. But there is another possibility worth considering. What if some of what you call strength is actually an old habit of staying ready for something that may no longer be approaching? This is where the deeper spiritual meaning of transformation begins to matter. Across spiritual traditions, transformation is rarely portrayed as becoming someone entirely different. It is more often the process of releasing what has completed its purpose, so something more alive can emerge. For Scorpio, that symbolism can be especially meaningful because the image of renewal is not about pretending the old self never existed. It is about understanding that a layer that once protected you does not have to remain attached forever simply because it once kept you safe. Think about deep water. From the surface, it can appear still, almost unreadable, while beneath it, entire currents continue moving in directions no one standing above can see. You may have learned to live like that yourself, carrying enormous emotional movement beneath a calm exterior, while deciding carefully who is allowed to see what is happening below. But depth does not require permanent secrecy, and privacy does not have to become isolation. There is a difference between choosing what belongs to you and building a wall so high that even genuine care cannot reach you. Perhaps this is why the most important question for you is not, "Who can I trust?" You may have asked some version of that question many times already. A deeper question might be, what am I protecting so fiercely that I no longer notice what it is costing me? Because sometimes the thing you are guarding is no longer your safety itself, but an old version of safety built around control, distance, silence, and the belief that you must understand everything before you are allowed to soften. You do not have to become careless to become more open. You do not have to trust everyone, reveal everything, or abandon the instincts that have helped you recognize what is real and what is not. The shift is subtler than that. Learning that discernment can remain sharp without becoming permanent defense, and that you can notice what is happening around you without immediately turning every uncertainty into something you must solve, contain, or protect yourself against. That may be where your gift begins to change shape. Your ability to see beneath the surface was never meant to become a reason for you to live beneath your own surface forever. The same awareness that helps you understand other people can eventually become a way of understanding yourself with greater honesty, especially the parts you have kept quiet because they once seemed too exposed, too complicated, or too difficult to place in anyone else's hands. And perhaps the deeper gift is not simply that you can recognize what others hide. It may be that, little by little, you learn that you do not have to hide from yourself anymore. What once felt like a necessary layer of armor can become something you are finally free to examine, loosen, and eventually leave behind when you realize that protection and freedom were never meant to be the same thing, and that something within you has already begun to recognize the difference. Now it's your turn to pause with what you have recognized so far. If something in this pattern feels strangely familiar, you don't have to dismiss that feeling or rush past it. Sometimes recognition arrives quietly, almost like a current moving beneath still water, and the first real change begins when you allow yourself to notice what that current has been carrying. So let me ask you something, Scorpio. What are you protecting so fiercely that you may have stopped asking whether you still need that protection? That question can linger, because the answer is rarely as simple as it first appears. For Scorpio, the deeper pattern may not be about becoming indispensable to other people. It may be about becoming so self-contained that needing anyone else begins to feel like a risk. You learn to rely on your own judgment, keep your emotions close, study what is happening before revealing what you feel, and create enough distance to make sure you will never be caught completely unprepared. This can look like strength from the outside. In a conversation, you may notice the change in someone's tone before they realize they have changed it. In a relationship, you may sense that something is different long before the other person is ready to acknowledge it. And instead of immediately asking what is wrong, part of you may begin watching, remembering, comparing, gathering small pieces of information until you feel certain enough to decide what you should do with what you have discovered. There is intelligence in that instinct, but there can also be exhaustion. Because when you are always trying to understand what lies beneath the surface, it becomes difficult to simply experience a moment without analyzing it. You may spend so much energy protecting your inner world that you leave very little room for someone to actually meet you there. And eventually, what began as discernment can quietly become a habit of distance, where being in control feels safer than being genuinely known. This is where the pattern becomes especially subtle. You may tell yourself that you are simply private, selective, perceptive, or unwilling to trust too easily. None of those qualities are necessarily a problem, but sometimes a strength becomes restrictive when you can no longer choose when to use it, when every uncertain moment requires another layer of observation, another internal calculation, another reason to keep part of yourself behind the door. For some people, this pattern may have roots in earlier experiences where trust had to be approached carefully. It does not require one dramatic event. Sometimes it begins with smaller lessons repeated over time, learning that revealing too much could leave you exposed, discovering that people did not always handle your honesty gently, or realizing that staying composed gave you a sense of control when everything around you felt uncertain. Eventually, the strategy becomes so familiar that you stop recognizing it as a strategy at all. It becomes part of the identity you carry into adulthood. You may become the person who can handle difficult truths, sit with uncomfortable emotions, and remain steady when other people fall apart. Yet when someone turns that same attention toward you and asks what you actually need, something inside may hesitate. The question is no longer about what is happening around you. It reaches somewhere much deeper. What do you want when you are not preparing for what might happen next? That is a very different question. For years, perhaps your mind has been more comfortable asking, what is really going on here? Or what am I missing? Or how can I make sure I understand this before I trust it? Those questions may have protected you before, but they can also keep you living one step ahead of the present moment. And when you are constantly preparing for the possibility of disappointment, you may miss the quieter experience of discovering that something can simply be safe. There is an ancient spiritual idea that transformation often grows out of the very places where a person has struggled most deeply. Not because suffering automatically makes someone wiser, and not because every wound has to become a lesson, but because the places that once demanded protection can eventually become places where greater awareness is possible. For Scorpio, this can be understood through the symbolism of renewal. What once served a purpose may eventually need to be released, so something more alive has room to emerge. Think of a seed beneath the earth. From the surface, nothing seems to be happening, yet beneath the soil, something is changing in darkness, breaking open in a way that would look like destruction if you could not see what was beginning to form. Your own transformation may work in a similar way. You do not have to destroy the part of yourself that learned to survive. You only have to recognize when that old protection has become too heavy to carry into every new chapter. Your depth is not the problem. Your intuition is not the problem. Your ability to recognize what others leave unsaid does not need to disappear. The deeper shift is learning that you can remain discerning without remaining permanently defended, that you can notice a change without immediately assuming danger, and that you can allow someone closer without surrendering your ability to choose what belongs to you. Perhaps this is the part of your gift that has been waiting to be understood differently. You have spent so much time learning how to see beneath the surface that you may not have realized how much of your own inner world has been kept beneath it too. And maybe the question is no longer whether you can uncover what other people hide, but whether you are willing to meet the parts of yourself you have kept hidden. Because once upon a time, staying protected felt safer than being seen. You do not have to become less discerning to become more open. You do not have to trust everyone or reveal everything. You simply begin to recognize the difference between wisdom and vigilance, between choosing privacy and building a permanent wall, between protecting your peace and protecting yourself from every possibility of being touched. That distinction may seem small at first, but it can quietly change the way you move through your relationships, your choices, and the deeper parts of your own life. There is an old spiritual idea about carrying one another through difficult seasons. But there is also wisdom in recognizing that each person has an inner weight that belongs to them. Scorpio can sometimes understand the first part in a different way. You may become deeply aware of what other people are carrying without realizing how much of their emotional atmosphere you have quietly taken into yourself. You notice what they cannot say, remember what they try to forget, sense where the pain is hiding, and then carry those impressions long after the conversation has ended. But there is another side to that gift that deserves to be seen. You may have learned how to hold enormous amounts inside without showing anyone how heavy they have become. You keep the unanswered questions, the doubts, the memories, the things you noticed but never mentioned, all tucked beneath a calm surface. And because you are so accustomed to containing yourself, you may sometimes mistake emotional silence for emotional strength, even when something inside you is asking to be acknowledged rather than buried. A gift that only moves inward and never finds a safe place to breathe can become its own kind of exhaustion. It is not weakness to need support, and it is not a failure of independence to let someone know that something has affected you. There comes a point when constantly protecting the deepest parts of yourself stops feeling like safety and starts feeling like living behind a locked door, with the key always in your own hand, but no longer remembering why you are afraid to open it. There is usually a moment when this becomes impossible to ignore, and it may not look dramatic from the outside. It can be a quiet night when you finally return to your own space after spending the day reading other people's moods, absorbing conversations, noticing tensions, and replaying things that did not quite make sense. Nothing has necessarily gone wrong, yet you feel a weariness that sleep alone cannot explain because your body is resting while your mind is still standing watch. It is the exhaustion of someone who has spent so much time studying the emotional weather around them that they forgot to ask what the weather feels like inside their own chest. You may know exactly when someone else is pulling away, hiding something, struggling to speak, or pretending to be fine. Yet when the attention turns inward, the picture can become strangely unclear, as though the same instincts that read everyone else suddenly become hesitant when they reach your own reflection. And eventually, a question begins to surface. Asterisk, can you loosen your grip on protection without losing the part of yourself that learned how to survive? Asterisk, that may be closer to Scorpio's deepest fear than vulnerability itself. It is not necessarily that you are afraid of feeling deeply. You already know how to do that. The deeper fear may be that if you stop controlling every entrance to your inner world, you will no longer know where safety ends and surrender begins. For some Scorpios, this can create an unusual relationship with solitude. Being alone may feel peaceful because there is nothing to interpret, nothing to question, and no one whose intentions you have to measure. But sometimes the same solitude can become a hiding place, where you never have to discover whether someone could actually meet you with patience and honesty. You can become so familiar with protecting your inner world that being truly known begins to feel more threatening than being alone. And this is where the question begins to change direction. It is no longer, how do I protect myself from what might hurt me? It becomes, asterisk, what would become possible if I trusted myself enough to stop preparing for every possible wound? Ask. You do not have to abandon your intuition to answer that question. You do not have to become careless, reveal everything, or offer trust where it has not been earned. The transformation is quieter, learning that discernment can remain sharp even when your defenses are no longer permanently raised. There is something deeply human in that distinction. The person who can recognize hidden pain in someone else may still struggle to recognize their own until the silence becomes too loud to ignore. You can understand why another person withdraws, why they become guarded, why they need time, why they struggle to speak honestly, and yet you may find yourself impatient with your own vulnerability. You may offer others the compassion you have quietly withheld from yourself, because your own defenses once convinced you that needing tenderness was the same as being exposed. That is why this is not hypocrisy. It is protection that has outlived part of its original purpose. A layer of armor can be useful when you are still learning what is safe, but eventually you have to ask whether you are wearing it because danger is present, or because removing it would require you to trust your own ability to handle whatever comes next. Those are very different things, and recognizing the difference may be one of the deepest forms of self-awareness available to you. Think of deep water beneath a quiet surface. There can be currents moving far below that no one standing at the shoreline can see, and Scorpio often understands life in that way. But you were not meant to spend your entire existence swimming through hidden depths simply because you learned how to survive there. Sometimes renewal begins when you stop searching the darkness for another threat and allow yourself to notice that the ground beneath you has become steady enough to stand on. Your depth does not need to disappear. Your intuition does not need to become quieter. Your ability to recognize what remains unspoken can still be one of the most meaningful parts of who you are. But perhaps the next expression of that gift is learning to turn the same honest attention toward yourself, to notice what you are holding, what you are still guarding, and which parts of your inner world may finally be ready to breathe without having to explain themselves first. It is always easier to recognize someone else's hidden burden than to admit that you may be carrying a similar one, only deeper beneath the surface. You can look at another person and immediately understand why they withdraw, why they hesitate, why they keep certain feelings locked away, and why they need time before they trust. But what happens when that same understanding turns toward you? What if, just for a moment, you stopped analyzing everyone else's emotional landscape and asked yourself, what would I discover if I looked at myself with the same honesty and attention I give to everyone else? That question can feel strangely intimate for Scorpio, because you are often far more comfortable observing what lies beneath the surface than allowing someone to observe what is happening beneath yours. Yet this inner mirror is where a different kind of transformation begins. Not the dramatic kind that tears everything down at once, but the quieter kind that happens when you finally notice the reasons behind your own defenses, the moments when you close a door before anyone has actually tried to enter, and the places where caution has quietly become your default language. You may have spent years developing an extraordinary ability to read what is not being said. You sense hesitation, emotional distance, hidden tension, and changes in energy that other people may not even notice. That awareness can be a profound strength, but it becomes limiting when your attention is always moving outward, searching for what needs to be understood or protected. Your deeper work is not to become more perceptive. You already know how to look beneath the surface. It is learning to turn that same gaze inward without immediately judging what you find there. And perhaps that is where the meaning of your gift begins to change. Your deepest gift was never simply the ability to uncover what other people keep hidden. It is your capacity to take what you have lived through, what you have felt, what you have survived, and gradually transform it into understanding. You can recognize pain because you've spent time close to your own depths. You can sense when something is changing because you know what it feels like when an inner world shifts long before anyone outside can see it. But that gift remains incomplete if all of that understanding continues to flow outward while the most private parts of you remain untouched. Imagine roots growing far beneath dark soil, reaching through layers of earth toward water no one standing above can see. From the surface, the ground may appear completely still, yet underneath, an entire living system is moving, searching, adapting, and preparing for what comes next. You can be like that too, carrying an enormous amount beneath a calm exterior, while very few people realize how much is happening below. And just as roots need water, the parts of you that have spent years protecting themselves need something more than constant vigilance. They need room to breathe. They need honesty. They need the experience of discovering that vulnerability does not automatically mean surrender, and that allowing yourself to be known does not mean handing someone else control over your inner world. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not tighten the armor, but become conscious enough to decide when the armor is still necessary. No one may notice when that old layer begins to become heavy. People may simply see your composure, your depth, your ability to remain steady when circumstances become complicated. They may admire how difficult it is to shake you, without realizing that staying guarded can require its own kind of effort. And over time you can become so accustomed to carrying yourself this way that continuing seems easier than asking whether there is another way to feel safe. But there is a difference between a protective instinct and a permanent state of protection. You may not be able to choose every feeling that rises within you, but you can begin to notice what you do with it. You can pause before assuming that uncertainty means danger. You can let a question remain unanswered for a little while, without immediately filling the silence with suspicion. You can allow someone to show you who they are, instead of deciding everything from what you fear they might become. That is where your choice becomes important. You do not have to stop being private. You do not have to become endlessly open, trust everyone, or abandon the instincts that have helped you recognize what is real. The transformation is much more subtle than that. It is learning that your discernment can remain sharp, even when your defenses soften, and that you can protect your boundaries without building walls around every vulnerable part of yourself. At first, this may appear in very small ways. A Scorpio who admits, "That hurt me," instead of pretending it did not matter. A Scorpio who allows someone trustworthy to offer support without immediately questioning the motive behind it. A Scorpio who notices the urge to withdraw and pauses long enough to ask whether they truly need solitude or whether they are simply afraid of being seen. None of these moments looks dramatic from the outside, but internally, each one begins to loosen a pattern that may have been forming for years. This is how renewal often happens, not as one enormous revelation and not as a sudden decision to become an entirely different person, but through repeated moments when you choose awareness over automatic defense. Some people may call that maturity, others may call it healing, self-knowledge, emotional growth, or simply learning to live with greater honesty. Whatever name you give it, the heart of the process is much simpler. You are discovering that safety does not always have to come from controlling everything around you. You can still be the person who notices what others miss. You can still value privacy, loyalty, depth, and emotional truth. You can still walk away from what feels unhealthy and protect the boundaries that matter to you. But you no longer have to make suspicion the price of discernment or distance the price of self-respect. The more you understand yourself, the less energy you may need to spend constantly preparing for what could go wrong. And perhaps this is where the meaning of your gift becomes more beautiful than it was before. You have spent so much time learning how to recognize what is hidden that you may now be learning how to bring what is hidden within you into the light of your own awareness. Not so that every private feeling has to be explained, and not so that every wound needs to become a story, but so that you can finally choose what stays, what softens, and what is ready to be released. There is something powerful about that kind of transformation. You're not becoming less intense. You are not becoming less intuitive. You are not losing the depth that makes you who you are. You are simply learning that depth does not require you to live in the deepest part of the water all the time, and that sometimes you are allowed to come closer to the surface. Breathe and discover that being visible does not always mean being vulnerable to harm. The real gift may be this, not merely knowing what other people hide, but becoming someone who no longer needs to hide from their own inner truth. The part of you that once believed protection had to be constant can begin to discover another possibility, that trust can be chosen carefully. Boundaries can remain intact, and your heart can soften without surrendering its wisdom. And somewhere beneath all those old layers, something has already begun to change, quietly gathering strength in the places no one else can see.